the other cheek. It appears that's exactly what Kamala Harris decided to do when she ran for president. And she's revealing that on this book tour that she's having. Now, she just had this recent interview with Rachel Maddow that is very revealing. I think there are things that she's saying during this interview that she should have said when she was running for president, and she did not. And I feel like it's also too late. I also want you to pay attention to what they did not discuss during this interview, and that is Gaza. But I do have an excerpt from her book about what happened with the Gaza situation, once again, which just reveals that Kamala Harris is not willing to take accountability for the role that her actions played as a part of her campaign. So let's go ahead and get into it. Was Kamala Harris right to turn the other cheek? Let's get into this first clip here with Kamala and Rachel Maddow.
Madam Vice President, I have to ask you about the point, the part of your book that has people most upset thus far, which is some of your writing about the decision around the president abandoning his reelection campaign, the timing there and how it's handled. You say in part, page 46, it's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. Whose decision should that have been? How should that decision have been made?
So when I write this, it's because I realize that I have and had a certain responsibility that I should have followed through on. Which is, and so when I talk about the recklessness, as much as anything, I'm talking about myself. There was so much, as we know, at stake. And as I write, you know, the where my head was at the time is that it would come off as being completely self-serving.
Let me pause here. So does everybody see what Kamala's doing right here? She talks about the recklessness, and a lot of us assume that she was talking about Joe Biden and him being reckless to not choose to drop out earlier, which would have given her more time, right? But now we see during this interview, she was actually talking about herself. So it's like she's still not willing to ultimately say that Joe Biden should have never sought re-election. He was in no condition to do so. All of us saw this with our own eyes. She's not willing to say that. She's still trying to play the game. Thus, she is still turning the other cheek. At least with this particular issue. Let's go on.
If you said to President Biden that you did not think he should run again.
Yeah, or even that he should question whether it's a good idea. But I think that, one of the reasons I wrote this book, Rachel, is there are actually a number of reasons. One that it is unprecedented, right? To your point of what you said in your opening, we had a president of the United States running for re-election, 3.5 months from the election, decides not to run. The sitting vice president enters the race against a former president of the United States who's been running for 10 years with 107 days to go. And it ended up being the closest presidential election in the 21st century. And there was so much about those 107 days that, for me, and this is really a behind the scenes look at those 107 days, was about seeing people who seemingly had nothing in common coming together by the thousands with a level of optimism and, dare I say, joy about the possibilities for America. And I hope to remind people about that light that people brought to it, and to remind people that that light is still there.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Thursday night, during my live stream, I am going to do a deep dive into what the Democratic Party should have done and what they're still doing wrong today. Case in point, Kamala Harris says that light is still there. No, it's not. Even dim leadership is showing you that that light is not there. It was very obvious when Chuck Schumer was willing to capitulate to Donald Trump and the GOP to get that bill passed when he should have been against that. And Chuck Schumer went on this press tour to defend his decision to do so. I think we all remember this, right? The light is not there. The light is still not there for the party and the leadership, because the reality is, if anything, the Democratic Party should be mobilizing right now, going across this country, trying to engage with the people who sat this election out, trying to engage with non-voters, trying to get the youth back, which that also declined, trying to figure out how to get Black voters back, which that also declined. Kamala Harris received the lowest support from Black voters when you compare her to Obama, Hillary, and Biden. But that's not what the Democratic Party is doing. The only people that decided, let's go out there and talk to the people, was Bernie Sanders and AOC with the oligarchy tour. But even that's come to an end. The point that I am going to make, I'm going to do a deep dive into this because it's needed. The point that I am going to make on Thursday's live stream is that the Democratic Party never made an effort to create something similar to what Turning Point USA did. Right? So Charlie Kirk goes around the country and goes to all these colleges throughout the year. It doesn't matter if it's an election season or not. The Democratic Party had years to develop something similar, someone to get out the youth vote, but they don't really care about the youth voters. They told us this during 2020 when Bernie was polling #1, especially among the youth. What did they say? Yeah, but those young people don't come out and vote. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Young people did come out and vote, and they came out and voted for Donald Trump. That's one of the reasons why he was able to win in 2024. But the light is gone, okay? The light is gone. All the lights are off and nobody's home. And you don't see Democrat leadership fighting the way that they should. They're not fighting like they're in a battle for their lives. They're really not. Hakeem Jeffries is just like, nah, I'm going to write a stern letter to Donald Trump. Chuck Schumer decides to go along with Trump's bill. The rest of them are just like sitting ducks. They didn't even really try to take advantage of the Epstein files, which should have been a big, gimme for the Democratic Party. They didn't even try to take advantage of that. Yeah, like a couple of them that said release the Epstein files. The rest of them are sitting there with their arms folded because their donors don't want them to say anything about it, because some of the donors could be involved with billionaires and investors that could be in those files. So the Democratic Party is not acting like they're in a fight for their lives. They are acting like they are totally fine with what is happening because they can use it to run on it in 2028. That's what they're acting like. So this just goes to show you that even though Kamala Harris is no longer running, all this time, I don't know what she's been doing, but she has not connected with the everyday people. Kamala Harris is still like out of the loop. She's like in her own world, because if you get out on the ground, and I'm not talking about the people that pay to come to your book appearances, because everyday working people ain't got money to pay tickets to go watch you read no damn book. If you get out on the ground and you talk to everyday working class people, you would know that the light is not there. Even some of my friends that are hardcore Democrat Party supporters are not enthusiastic, are not excited about the Democratic Party at all. But in her world, she believes the light is there because she is in certain circles and she's not willing to get out of them. She learned nothing all this time.
And we can't let that be extinguished by an election or the individual who's in the office right now. Because to the point of all those folks who got out and protest about the Kimmel suspension.
And about everything else that people have protested.
Right. In the variety of ways, whether it be going to a protest or being, with their pocketbook or getting engaged in local and state and federal elections, they'll make a difference. And they've made a difference. And I guess the last point is that.
Pause. Well, yeah, you would know about the protests, right? Because people protested against Biden and Kamala because of the genocide. And her response was, I'm speaking. So now she's encouraging people to go to protest. So that's the thing. It's like she wants you to protest against Donald Trump, but she didn't want you to protest against them. And there's actual genocide that was happening.
We've got to really remember that this person who's in the White House promised a whole lot of people who supported him and voted for him that he would do one thing, which is bring down costs and prices. And he lied to them. And we need to remember that as we move forward with the next series of elections. The midterms are around the corner, that it's not just about him by himself. There were others around him who perpetuated that same promise and have not followed through. They're about to go into negotiations around the continuing resolution, the budget. And I know that leaders Schumer and Jeffries are going to meet with the president, I think in the Oval Office. And good for them to go there and ask Donald Trump, the president of the United States, to justify why he is proposing to cut Medicaid, why he is willing to shut down the government for the sake of putting on the backs of working people the tax cut he gave to the richest people in America.
So that's one part that I wanted to focus on. And I do wanted to say this. Kamala Harris says, well, he promised to bring down prices. She's correct about that. The prices have not been lowered. But the reality is, Kamala, you and Biden promised to do the same thing. That's one of the reasons why Trump won again, because of the economy. That was the number one issue for voters that were polled. When I talked to people on the ground before this election happened, you guys remember I was doing panels on this show. I was going to talk to people on the ground as well to ask them. And I told you, I warned you back then. Most people told me they were going to sit it out. And their number one concern was the economy. That's how you get this flippity flop. Anybody notice something different? We had Bush for 2 terms. We had Obama for 2 terms. Trump once flips back to Democrat. Biden once flips back to Republican. Trump wins again. That's economic pain. That's really what that is. Now, wait till you see till we get into this next part here where she talks about who she really wanted to pick for her VP. And honestly, I don't think this should have been in the book. I really don't. Because if you're Tim Walz, what does that say to you? If you're Tim Walz and you're watching this, you're like, damn, she didn't even want me. I was second, right? Oh my God, listen.
Let me ask you a politics question. I mentioned in the intro tonight that you say in the book really bluntly that your personal first choice for your running mate would have been Pete Buttigieg, and you praise him effusively. You say he would have been an ideal partner if I were a straight man. And you say effectively that demographically it was too much to ask of the American people to ask them to elect you with him as your running mate. I wonder if his reaction to that, since this part of the book has come out, if you've had any reflection on that, or I guess I'd ask you to just elaborate on that a little bit. It's hard to hear. Yeah. With you running as, you're the first woman elected vice president, you're a Black woman and a South Asian woman elected to that high office, very nearly elected president, to say that he couldn't be on the ticket effectively because he was gay. It's hard to hear.
No. That's not what I said, that he couldn't be on the ticket because he is gay. My point, as I write in the book, is that I was clear that in 107 days, in one of the most hotly contested elections for president of the United States, against someone like Donald Trump, who knows no floor, to be a Black woman running for president of the United States and as a vice presidential running mate, a gay man, with the stakes being so high, it made me very sad, but I also realized it would be a real risk.
Basically what she's saying, and it's interesting, I guess she told Rachel Maddow, no, that's not what I said. But basically, I guess what she's saying is that she didn't feel comfortable having a ticket where there were two, I guess you could say, marginalized people on the ticket, because she felt as though their chances would have been even worse, right? So I have something else to say about the Pete Buttigieg part, something that she's not going to tell you. But if you're Tim Walz and you're hearing this, how does that make you feel? To know that you were the side dude, that you weren't first considered. I don't feel like Kamala had to put that in the book. I feel like that's kind of a low blow. Like really. Now, let me tell you about the Pete Buttigieg part. Pete Buttigieg, she thought, would have been a better pick. He was the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He ran for president in 2020 in the Democrat primary along with Kamala Harris. And I'm going to keep it real with you. Her first pick was the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. The same mayor that told a Black woman when her son was found hanging from a tree, I told you there's been multiple cases of these, that he would do everything in his power to get to the bottom of it and never did anything. I only found out about that story because she went to the local press. Mainstream media didn't want to touch it. The same Pete Buttigieg who demoted the Black police officer because he came forward and said that there were racist officers that he was basically fighting against in the police department. Instead of punishing the racist police chief, this came up during the Democrat primary debates in 2020. Instead of punishing the racist officers, Pete Buttigieg, who was the mayor at that time, demoted the Black officer who reported it. And that's her first pick. What does that tell you about Kamala Harris? They keep trying to push Pete Buttigieg on people. And if you really look into his background when he was mayor, the Black community in South Bend, Indiana was not fond of Pete Buttigieg for good reasons. But that's who her first pick was. So what does that tell you?
No matter how, I've been an advocate and an ally of the LGBT community my entire life. So it wasn't about So it wasn't about any prejudice on my part, but
that
we had such a short period of time, and the stakes were so high. I think Pete is a phenomenal public servant. And I think America is and would be ready for that. But when I had to make that decision with 2 weeks to go, and maybe I was being too cautious, I'll let our friends, we should all talk about that. Maybe I was. But that's the decision I made. And I, as with everything else in the book, I'm being very candid about that.
Yeah.
With a great deal of sadness about also the fact that it might have been a risk.
Will you consider running in 2028?
That's not my focus right now.
I know
it's not my focus at all.
I know
it really isn't.
I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're not considering it now, but are you saying when you said you're not going to run for governor of California?
Correct.
Were you saying you are never going to run for anything ever again, or were you just saying I'm not going to run for that office right now?
That was the decision before me, and I made the decision not to run for governor of California. By the way, there are a lot of great candidates running, and I love my state, and we want somebody to definitely follow in the footsteps of Gavin in terms of standing up and understanding the power that California has to stand up to what we're saying in DC.
So they are still trying to make President Kamala Harris happen. They're still trying to. Why does she need to run for anything? Why does she need to run for anything? Why can't she just continue, doing why can't she go back to law? Why can't she do that? There's another part here where she is questioned about Zoran Mandami. You guys need to see this, Watch this little sneaky thing that she does here.
What do you think of him and his candidacy? And what do you think of mainline Democratic shyness and agitation about the prospect that he's going to win?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, he's the Democratic nominee and he should be supported.
Do you endorse his candidacy?
I support the Democrat in the race, sure. But let me just say this. He's not the only star. I know that, he's in New York, and I know New Yorkers think they're the center of the world. And here we are in New York having this interview.
It is the biggest city in the country.
And I love New York, as the saying goes. I really do. But I mean, there are people like Barbara Drummond in Mobile, Alabama.
What do you think?
She couldn't just say, yes, I support him. When Rachel asked her, like, do you give your endorsement? Oh, yes, of course. She couldn't just say that and just leave it alone. She had to go on and say, well, he's not the only star. And there's also da-da-da. That right there let you know, when you can hear the uneasiness in her voice, that right there let you know she didn't really want to do that. But she knows that, and I looked at the numbers again today. If the election were today, there's no way in hell he doesn't win. There's no way. He's continuing to gain. Like, he's still, the lead between him and Andrew Cuomo is ridiculous. So she knows. But it's just like, she had to add that extra little, she couldn't just end it with that. Right? But you want to promote Pete Buttigieg, Wine Cave Pete. So when we talk about turning the other cheek, I think the wildest thing that she said in this interview, and this is going viral on social media, I don't know why she struggles so much with interviews, but the one thing she said that is getting the most attention is this comment that she made here about Donald Trump. Listen to this.
A tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump.
Uh-oh.
And these titans of industry are not.
Let's go back.
Tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump. And these titans of industry are not speaking up.
Why is she putting Donald Trump in the same category as communism? This is hilarious to me. So many people are calling her out for this on social media. This is hilarious to me because Donald Trump called Kamala a communist. She's not. And now she's calling Donald Trump a communist. He's not. I think people need to look up the definition of communism because people are just throwing this word out there to see if it sticks. They throw it out, whatever. Bam, bam, communism, commie, just to see if it sticks. And a lot of people aren't even looking at the definition. How dare you? I saw this and I said, how dare you try to even make the comparison of Donald Trump and communist leaders? Is Donald Trump offering authoritarianism? Absolutely. But don't you dare put him in the same category as the communist leaders. How dare you? Real communists are listening to this and they're pissed. I'm not the only one who sees the craziness here. Rotimi, I want to show you what he said. Rotimi said, I just can't understand how some of these answers are so bad. You've had months of no media to come up with something to say. I don't understand why this is so difficult for her. And I'm saying to myself, like, look, Donald Trump is a lot of things, but he's definitely not a communist. This is how desperate they are becoming. Now, guess what they did not talk about in this interview? Gaza. Not once during that conversation with Kamala and Rachel Maddow, not once did they discuss the Gaza situation, which is also part of the reason why she lost. However, Axios was able to gather some of the verbiage from her book where she did say something about it. And I want you guys to see this because this is just cracking me up. Biden's response to Gaza was inadequate, Harris says in her new book. Let's get into it, guys. Kamala said that Joe Biden was incapable of showing more empathy for civilians in Gaza killed by Israel in response to Hamas attacks. I pleaded with Joe when he spoke publicly on this issue to extend the same empathy he showed to suffering of Ukrainians to the suffering of innocent Gazan civilians. This is coming from her book, but he couldn't do it. While he could passionately state, I am a Zionist, his remarks about innocent Palestinians came off as inadequate and forced. Kamala, your message about the Palestinians in Gaza was also inadequate. Your message about what to do about Israel and giving them weapons was also inadequate, because when you were asked this question, you said you would not withhold weapons from Israel. That was inadequate during a genocide. And don't get me wrong, we called out Joe Biden so many times on this show. We called him Genocide Joe, everything under the book. We called him out for this. But at some point, that mantle was passed on to you, Kamala, and you were the nominee. Joe Biden no longer was. And you had every ample opportunity when you were questioned about the Israel-Gaza issue to say how you really felt. And what we heard from you is that you would not withhold weapons. What we also heard from you was, you said there are a lot of people suffering in Gaza. We got to get the ceasefire deal done. That is important. Hold on to that, because Kamala Harris also exposes herself in this book with the same subject. And she thinks she's saying, I kept asking Joe to da-da-da-da, but she also exposes herself. Because when Joe Biden was no longer the candidate and you were, you had every opportunity to take a different position. It goes on to say, this part right here, let's get down to this. She writes that Biden's unpopularity hurt her in 2024, and that one of the reasons was because of Biden's perceived blank check to Netanyahu. She argues that the conservative Netanyahu didn't care about Biden's loyalty to Israel. He wanted Donald Trump in the seat opposite him, not Joe, not me. A Harris, but you stood by Israel anyway. You see what I mean? A Harris spokesperson declined to comment. A Biden spokesperson did not respond to a request for one. It goes on to say here, let me go down here. She added, I would caution the media about citing anonymous sources in the orbit about sensitive national security conversations between the president and the vice president that take place in the Oval Office. So that was when one of the spokesperson came forward about pushing them to be more, of course, sensitive towards the Palestinian people. Biden fumed privately and publicly at Netanyahu's approach to war. You can't have another 30,000 Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after Hamas. There are other ways to deal with Hamas, Biden said in 2024. But listen to this part right here. She also said the reason why she did not pick Josh Shapiro as her running mate was because of the conversations that he had about the Gaza issue, which I think many of us kind of assumed that anyway. She said in her book, I believe Israel has a right to respond to the atrocities on October 7th, but the ferocity of Netanyahu's response, the number of innocent Palestinian women and children killed, and his failure to prioritize the lives of the hostages had weakened Israel's moral position internationally and created angry dissent within Israel itself. She writes that there was some bitterness that we had not given a speaking slot to a Palestinian spokesperson at the Democratic Convention, but says she knew the section of my convention speech dealing with Gaza war had a lot riding on it. So again, she's not taking accountability, right? I mean, they were protesting outside. They were begging her, please let one of us speak. especially considering the speech, from what I understand, was already approved. She allowed the Israeli family to get up there and speak, and not one Palestinian to get up there and speak. So is that Joe Biden's fault too? Because at that point, you were the nominee. Doesn't want to take accountability. And this part right here, she acknowledges becoming frustrated with left-wing protesters who interrupted her rallies about Gaza. The threat to withhold their vote got to me. It felt reckless. The issue was not binary, but the outcome of this election certainly was. She adds, why aren't they protesting at Trump rallies? I wonder. And this is why I say Kamala Harris is completely out of touch. So let me answer some of these questions. Number one, people weren't protesting at Trump rallies because Trump wasn't the president of the United States at that point in time. You were a nominee, but you were vice president in the Biden administration when the genocide started. And it started under Joe Biden. Trump continued it, but it started under your administration. At any point in time, you could have come forward and said, well, this is how the president feels, but this is how I feel. And for people who say, well, the vice president can't do these things, bullshit. Dick Cheney did a lot and got a lot accomplished when he was vice president. Many things that we didn't agree with, like the Iraq War, but he did quite a bit. Another part here that I want to get to. She said it was reckless. It felt reckless that people were willing to withhold their vote because of the genocide in Gaza. I push back on that and I say a genocide is reckless. I think it's reckless to eliminate an entire population of people. That's supposed to be the reckless point. And it seemed to me, from what I'm gathering, that's been reported from this book so far, that Kamala seems to feel as though we just owed her our vote because she wasn't Donald Trump. She really wants to sit up here and pretend like she has no accountability. And that's the part that drives me crazy. If this was so problematic for Kamala Harris, why is it when she had the interview with The View, why did she say that she wouldn't do anything differently than Joe Biden? Now you come out, you write this book and you say, oh, I felt this way, I felt that way. Don't nobody want to hear all of this now. People kill me. They run these races and then they lose and then they write a book and they try to make money talking about all the things that they would have, could have done, but did not do. The time has passed. Kamala Harris wants to seriously pretend as though she did not speak at AIPAC conventions and promise to give them weapons for a decade. Listen to this.
Our defense relationship is critical to both nations, which is why I support the United States' commitment to provide Israel with $38 billion in military assistance over the next decade.
Over the next decade. See, they act like these videos don't exist anymore. That was before she ran for president. So this goes to show you she had already made a commitment to not withhold weapons from Israel. Is this Joe Biden's fault too? That's you. You were at that AIPAC convention. You made that promise to Israel. But I guess, it seems like to me a lot of fingers are being pointed in this book. Did Joe Biden make you do this too? Shout out to Track AIPAC. You were rejected because you refused to stop supporting the genocide of Palestinians. Did Joe Biden make you take $9.4 million from the Israeli lobby? Is that his fault too? Now, you see, she told on herself, right? Because check this out. This is also from the book. Shout out to Bree. She posted this. In 107 days, Harris admits that by July 2024, she knew Netanyahu did not want to end the war and that it was clear nothing would be accomplished by meeting him. And yet, Democrats remain committed to their bear hug BB strategy while blaming Hamas for the ongoing genocide. Ladies and gentlemen, If Kamala Harris is acknowledging in her book that she knew in July of 2024 that Benjamin Netanyahu did not want to end the war, then you ought to know that her entire campaign, she was lying to you, because she became the nominee also in July of 2024. So if she knew that, then every time that you saw her give an interview, every time you saw her speak and she say, we got to get the ceasefire deal done, it was all an act. It was all a show. Because she already knew that he didn't want to end the war. And if she knew that, how come Kamala Harris never said that when she was on the campaign trail? So this is why, I don't feel sorry for Kamala Harris. I think that there are times when you should turn the other cheek, and there are times that you probably shouldn't. And I think when it came to that election, when Kamala was the nominee, I don't think she should have turned the other cheek with Joe Biden. Joe Biden, from what I understand, was an asshole. I think that Kamala should have went out on her own. I think that Kamala should have ran a campaign that she actually believed in. Don't sound like she really believed in this stuff. And I think that she should have broke away from Joe Biden, and she should have put all that out on the table. When she was running, she should have told people Benjamin Netanyahu does not want to end this war. She should have allowed Palestinian speaker at the Democratic National Convention. She should have said on The View, yes, here are the things I would do different than Joe Biden. So you can't come to people now and say, well, this is what was really going on, but this is how I really felt. Kamala basically just showed people that she cannot be trusted. And this is what some of the feeling, especially some Black people had. That's why they didn't vote for you. That's why you lost the Black vote. Sometimes you don't need to turn the other cheek. And I don't know what to say about these interviews, because you would think by now at this point, she would learn to get better at these interviews. Nobody wants to hear, oh, I wanted this person, I could have done this, or I could have done that, and this is what I really wanted to do. Your hands weren't tied. It's very telling, you guys. I don't really know. Politics is theater. It really is. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.